everyone, and welcome to the Daily Blue. I'm Karin Caro. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Jeffrey Reynolds, the President and CEO of Family and Children's Association, is here to discuss some issues on Long Island, drug use on Long Island, and get an idea of what we can do about it. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Now, you've had a lot of publicity lately about some of the issues that are happening here on Long Island, especially with heroin.
Yeah. You know, I think substance abuse across the board, whether we're talking about heroin or alcohol or marijuana, poses some real significant challenges for young people in this region. Family and Children's has been around for 130 years trying to address the needs of families and young people. And when you line up the challenges for young people here on Long Island, substance abuse ranks near the top. And when we're talking about heroin, the consequences are much more immediate. So it used to be that we talked about kids, quote unquote, going down the wrong road with alcohol use, marijuana use, and whatever. And perhaps it had an impact on their grades and their lives and whatever else. Prescription medications, opiates that all too often lead to heroin abuse, has real significant and real immediate consequences for kids. And so last year we saw more fatal overdoses among young people on Long Island than ever before.
Right.
We saw more arrests of young people than ever before, and quite frankly, more families' lives torn up than ever before.
Sure.
I think, you know, the frustrating piece for us, and I guess the positive side of that, is that a lot of that substance abuse is preventable.
Right.
Right. So we need to get in and do a better job at educating kids. And the other good news, I suppose, in the scheme of things, is that addiction is a treatable disease.
Right.
You know, so there's hope in this. It's a very difficult situation, I think, for Long Island now. When we write the chapter of Long Island's kids, this is going to be a real difficult one for a lot of families.
Sure.
But the upside, and where we find the hope, is that preventable, treatable, and there are a lot of young people, and these are the stories you don't hear, who have found a path to recovery and are doing well and are engaging their peers in healthier behaviors.
Sure. So tell me a little bit. First, I want to talk about your background a bit, because you didn't really expect to be doing what you're doing now. You went to Dowling. You also went. Your next step was what school?
LIU.
LIU. And then you got your doctorate at Stony Brook.
Yeah.
And you were working on rape and crime hotline. And then, of course, you spent 19 years in the AIDS unit, right?
Yeah, kind of out of the frying pan into the fire.
Totally.
So yeah, right out of school, dealt with sexual assault and domestic violence.
Wow.
Spent, you know, almost 2 decades of my life, which seems funny saying now, working on HIV-related issues.
Wow.
Public policy, again, substance abuse in a lot of ways. Then went to LICAD, and one of the key drivers in my move to LICAD was my mom died of alcoholism.
Really?
And for years, we tried very, very hard to get her the help she needed. And it, you know, the mindset was, well, if someone doesn't want to go to treatment, you can't make them, and it is what it is. LICAD was an organization that did interventions for families, so gave them another out when their loved one said, I'm not getting treatment, I don't have a problem, you're all crazy. Those families had a different option that most people never hear about. And so I had the privilege of running LICAD for 5 years. You know, a very small organization, but with a big history.
You did a lot of amazing things there.
And had some fun. You know, I like to think that we changed some lives and did some good. And, you know, recently made the move to Family and Children's Association.
Right. So what brought you over to them?
Some conversations on the part of their board members, but here for me, here was the deciding factor. LICAD is a small organization, 15 staff people, you know, serves 1,000 people a month. Family and Children's is a much larger organization, impacts you know, upwards of 20 to 25,000 people per year.
Wow.
And so for me, it really became a question of where can I have the biggest impact in the short amount of time? Where can I take, you know, almost 3 decades now worth of lessons and carry them forward in a positive kind of way and only enhance the contribution to Long Island. And so it was a move that made sense. It was a bittersweet move because I love LICAD. You know, I'm still in touch with everybody there. We did some great work. But also having a great time at Family and Children's so far.
Now, tell us what services Family and Children's provides.
Yeah. You know, the organization, as I mentioned, has been around for more than 100 years, 131 to be exact. Started out as a children's orphanage in Nassau County in the truest sense of the word. So all the good and bad that goes along with orphanages was endemic to this organization. But over time, the organization has grown to be one of the largest nonprofits on Long Island, providing a whole host of services to folks across the lifespan, so young people, families, even seniors. So right now we have more than 24 programs, which includes things like 2 shelters for runaway and homeless youth, the only shelters in Nassau County for runaway and homeless youth. A PINS diversion and family mediation program for families that are struggling, particularly with adolescents.
Really? So not necessarily anything to do with drugs or
No,
alcohol,
these are kids who are being kids and perhaps have behavioral issues that go beyond the extreme, and families typically who are overworked and really need some support and guidance in how to manage some of these behaviors.
And I think in the long run, you're actually preventing then. That's
exactly it. That's the notion here, is that, can we shore up some of that so that families and kids aren't turning to substance abuse, so that families don't need to have their kid arrested in order to bring about change.
Yeah.
And you see, the heartwarming piece of this, similar to addiction, is that families come in one way and they leave in a very different way. And you come to understand that just a little bit of help goes a long way.
Yeah.
We also do run 2 licensed chemical dependency clinics in Nassau County. At the other end of this, we've got a whole cadre of senior programs.
Oh, wow.
We've got a guardianship program where we help manage the affairs for upwards of 50 seniors in Nassau County.
Wow.
We have a bill payer system where we'll go in and help folks sort out their bills, make sure that everything's paid on time.
That's extraordinary.
We've got an ombuds program where we have a volunteer in every nursing home in Nassau County to ensure that when families leave their loved one off, that everything is being handled in a way that would do them proud and reflect home life. And so I think what we've done is really created a system of care. I hate to term it this way, but we do, from cradle to grave.
Right.
And so we've got a nursery school co-op in the village of Hempstead.
Wow.
For young parents, and then we've got the senior programs in the town of North Hempstead, and almost everything in between.
Yeah, so I think your life has been really geared towards helping people. It seems that you've made it your mission to help people.
But I feel like I get more back though, because each night I'm able to put my head on the pillow knowing that I help someone.
Sure.
And it's not, I think in a lot of these cases, it's not rocket science, it's not difficult.
Sure.
Sometimes it's just some words of encouragement, sometimes it's connecting them with the right person or the right organization. But that person knows that you have a go-to if you have a problem, and I think that goes a long way. So it's not magic or rocket science.
I do have to ask you, though, on a personal note, you have kids and a wife, and obviously it can be stressful and probably affect you, even negatively and emotionally. How does your family deal with some of the situations that you've had to be in?
The good thing is, since I worked in AIDS and I worked in substance abuse, and now I kind of work in across domains, my wife and I have decided that I'm the one to have the sex and drugs conversations.
You just got elected for that.
But you know what? It's and my kids ask questions. My kids are very young, and so even my daughter, who is 7, will ask questions. She'll hear me on the phone. She'll ask questions to say, what do you do? Well, I help people. Well, how do you help people?
Right.
And so it's really spurred a lot of conversations early on in the game that I think should be conversations that happen earlier. They happen on a regular basis. Life, I think, is a balancing act for most families. I will say the one thing I'm really clear about is I go out and do my work in the community, and that's really important. But being a good father and husband is equally as important. And for me to go out and recommend to folks that they do one thing while I'm doing something else in my personal life, there's a disconnect there that doesn't feel genuine. So I always try to manage that in the right way, make sure that I'm balancing everything.
That's wonderful.
The way it should be.
Well, your family must be so proud of you.
I think so.
I really think so.
Although, and I've told the story before, my wife will say to my daughter, look, Dad's on News 12 or Dad's on TV or whatever else. And my daughter will say, can I watch Dora instead? So, leave it to kids to cut you right down to size when your head gets a little bit too big.
Well, they're used to it.
So it's the reality check.
I get that too. I do want to go back to the serious subject of what's happening with the heroin use on Long Island. I know that News 12 did this incredible segments with you on what's happening here on Long Island. I want to know who's affected most in our area with the heroin addiction.
What we're seeing now is young people between the ages of 18 and 25 seem to be making up the bulk of the cases, although we see them both earlier and younger. We've seen people as young as 13 and 14 using heroin. which means that there's probably a drug history that led up to that because most people don't start at heroin.
Right.
You know, one of the things that worries me is that for parents of young people between the ages of 18 and 25, they'll look at something like that and say, well, my kid drinks a lot and they smoke pot here and there, and I know they pop pills, but thank God they're not doing heroin. And so heroin, I think, has, you know, recontextualize this entire thing and maybe put us in a position where we're not as vigilant when it comes to underage drinking. We're not as vigilant as when it comes to marijuana, particularly at a time when we're debating marijuana policy as a country. So,
right.
you know, I always say to parents, you should be talking with your kids about this on a regular basis. It is, I think, the single biggest threat to kids right now. And when you look at the fatalities, when you look at the fact that a kid who consumes alcohol before the age of 15 is 5 times more likely to develop addiction over their lifetime. And left untreated, addiction can be fatal.
Sure.
More parents ought to be involved. You know, if I drove past my daughter's school in a van with the windows blocked out and called the kid over, and the school called a meeting, thousands of parents would descend on that school to say, hey, what's going on and what are you doing to protect our kids? Overdoses and substance abuse are killing kids left and right. Parents ought to be up in arms. And they ought to be up in arms not only with school districts, but in terms of their own families.
Right.
And we're in the middle of a crisis, and my hope is that families will respond. And again, a lot of this is preventable.
Yeah, and so how is it preventable? I mean, I have conversations with my kids all the time.
Yeah.
They seem to really be adamant that they would never take drugs, but I don't want to ignore the fact that the kids are going to tell me that. They're going to...
And the threats are out there. So, you know, there's a couple things. You know, I think some of this, and parents will look and say, tell me exactly what I should tell my kids.
Right.
Well, that's part of it, but I think instilling the right values in your kids is important.
Sure.
The second thing is, are you modeling good behaviors?
Right.
So parents
yourself.
Right. Parents who come home after a long day at work and say, oh, what a day, I need a drink.
Yeah.
You're sending a message to your kids that if you have a tough day, alcohol is the answer to make that all better.
Sure.
If you are using prescription meds to fall asleep on a regular basis and they're not prescribed by a doctor or using them in a way that hasn't been prescribed, you're basically modeling that behavior. So when you say to kids one thing and do another, we all know what happens.
Right.
And so part of it, I think, is being more conscious of it, having the conversations more quickly, more regularly, and modeling really good behavior.
And you know, in the mommy and daddy world, the adult world, I think it's okay for people to rush right away to drugs when they're having stressful situations. And I've heard many of my peers and colleagues and mothers and friends say, you know, if you're having a stressful day, just take this. Or, I mean, I've never taken anything, but that's the easy go-to. That's what you suggest. I mean, it's so easy. Just run to the doctor. They'll give you a prescription for it. I mean, to me, that is sending a message.
And when kids do that, they lose their other coping mechanisms. So as adults, we've developed coping mechanisms, whether it be exercise or meditation or whatever else. We found other ways to modulate all of that. If you're a young person and you haven't developed those skills yet and you begin using something else to make it all go away, you lose the ability to form those basic skills. And it impacts you later in life.
Well, I'm noticing with people that have had drug issues and you know, are recovering, that it has affected their brain development, especially at a certain age. And 18 through 25, your brain isn't even fully developed. So what's happening there?
Well, and look, some people would say brain development doesn't stop until you're well into your 30s.
Okay.
My wife would say among men it takes even longer than that.
I'm going to agree.
but there's critical things that happen during that period of time. And that's one of the things that drives me crazy about the discussions around marijuana use and such.
Right.
It does have an impact on the developing brain. We know that now. And you know, the more we can do to strengthen kids. You know, ironically, as a country, we're trying to find ways to advance education and have kids be better prepared in life.
Yeah.
Some of this comes down to just basic parenting in the early days.
Right. Wow. Well, you've taught me quite a bit today, and I hope that you've taught our viewers a bit more about what they can do and some of the issues here. Tell us a little bit of how we can get in touch with Family and Children's and what you need there. Can people donate? Can they help? What can they do?
Well, donations, you know, we don't really need those.
Right.
Every organization does. I'll tell you, every nonprofit on Long Island is really struggling because the needs here in this region have grown over time. You know, whether we're talking about poverty or hunger or homelessness or adolescent services, everybody's needs have escalated over time. And so At FCA, we rely heavily on volunteers in all of our programs. So if you want to work with kids, we can help you do that.
Really?
If you'd rather work with seniors, so we have dozens of volunteer opportunities available to folks.
Good.
The donations piece is really critical. Our caseloads are increasing on a regular basis. Government funding doesn't keep up with that, doesn't keep pace with that. And so the donations are needed more than ever before. We're very proud of the fact that we've gotten every possible seal of approval in terms of the way we spend our funds. We've made sure that our administration is lean and that a maximum amount of every dollar is going directly back into those services.
That's terrific.
And of course, log on to our website, learn more about us, familyandchildrens.org. If you have needs, if you just need some advice about parenting or need to access one of our programs, we're always available and ready to help.
Yeah, I know you're really receptive to speaking to people. You've even done the live chat. You've answered Facebook messages.
Yes.
And even live on Facebook, I've seen you respond to things. So please get in touch with Dr. Jeffrey Reynolds if you have any questions or concerns, or if you'd like to get in touch with Family and Children's Association. Again, it's familyandchildrens.org.
Yep.
And thank you for joining us here on the Daily Blue. We hope that you'll come back soon.
Absolutely.
I don't think the subject is over.
Yeah, I'd love to.
We really got to talk again. Okay, thank you all for joining us. I'm Karin Caro, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.